Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Changing Hearts and Minds series. I am Ellza Malok, and I have here Brad Newberger.
Hey Elza, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about acoustics. And for those of you that are new or have not seen our previous episodes, the Changing Hearts and Minds series is really all about uncovering new areas of human studies and all types of research to go from really presumed to validated and informed. And this episode really focuses on the experience lens, which is why we're talking about acoustics as an experience model. Um, Brad, I'll let you do our quick overview of the topic and why acoustics matters when it comes to the human condition and how it impacts everything from performance to behavior to even mindsets.
Acoustics is everywhere, and thank you, Elza. I'm Brad. I'm the co-founder of Ambiance IQ, nation's leaders in sensory branding and acoustical support. And acoustics is like a funny name for noise, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? And noise is everywhere, right? It could be something pleasing like music, and we've covered that in a different topic, or it could be something super annoying, kind of like traffic noise or somebody's phone ringing, or you know what my single biggest noise pet peeve is in the entire world? I have two, but my biggest one is if I'm on an airplane or in someplace public and somebody's either using speakerphone or they're not using their headphones to listen to music and they're kind of broadcasting it to everybody else around us. Have you had that happen to you?
Yeah, that is also, I don't mind the talking as much as the scrolling on whatever social media that has video, like a TikTok or what have you,
Yeah.
and therefore um voluntolding us the experience that they're having.
It's funny, and it produces, and neuroscientifically it's actually true, it can kind of produce your fight or flight and you almost your cortisone reflex inside your system, where if you get noises that are particularly jarring, it can literally give you that like you feel it, right? You feel tensed up, your muscles start to go, you feel your blood pressure start to rise, right? That's the impact that acoustics can have, both pleasant acoustics. So think about someplace like the Walt Disney Hall in Southern California, where it was a
Mhm.
acoustically designed theater hall to ensure everybody has the same exact listening experience, or the Sphere in Vegas, where it's designed to make sure that you have this aesthetically pleasing environment, to a restaurant where it is high ceiling. It's like an old warehouse. Think about this: high ceilings, hard floors, metallic tables, and just basically metal on metal on metal on metal. Guess what? Do you think that room sounds like a place that you actually want to be in?
Yeah, probably not.
No, it's an echo chamber.
Yeah, all that bouncing around, I'm sure, just creates a really harsh environment for the ears.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting because we're talking about acoustics as a whole, right? And what
Yep.
it does to human health and performance. And I think that there's the key word that you and I have talked about in the past is there's context around how sound is interpreted and what's okay and what's not and so on. And I'll start with with kind of the extreme levels you discussed when you have jarring, loud noises that kind of occur. But the other side of the spectrum is when you have low noise, um, but on a chronic level and what that does. And I think in many cases, when we talk about long-term health, the low chronic level is just below kind of an acceptable form of uncomfortable, a tolerant form of uncomfortable, that it gets ignored until it becomes kind of an environment. And if you've ever had a sibling, for example, that would constantly like do something or play pranks on you, and this is what my siblings used to do. They would have like an alarm because I'm not a morning person, and they would hide it somewhere in my room, and therefore it would slowly increase in noise. Um, it was, some called it childhood, might have called it psychological warfare. It doesn't really matter, but that's kind of what I think about when I think about low, annoying noises, because it starts to get on your nerves, right?
Yeah.
After a while.
It's producing that fight or flight reflex. It gets under
Yeah.
your skin and it impacts, again, it gets your blood pumping. And that's why it can have such a negative impact in terms of your health, because physiologically you're actually being impacted by the noise that are being done. And ultimately you can't control it. It's not like you can just go and push a button and say, okay, I'm just going to turn off my hearing right now, right? It doesn't work that way, because your brain, just like when we talked about our first episode on smell, your smell is still your most powerful of scents, right? So your smell and your sound are both working at all hours of the night, but the number one reason they're doing that is to prevent danger, right? So this has been hard coded in our DNA since the prehistoric times, whereas humans were listening for danger, right? Prehistoric humans were listening for dinosaur footsteps, right? So if they heard that, they can wake up and try to run into the cave to protect themselves from an oncoming T-Rex trying to eat them for dinner, right? Now, we don't really have that same threat anymore, but we have different kinds of threats that are done by that sense. And that's why when we talk about this, it's really the prehistoric part of our brains that this is really going back to, that primitive source. And smell is the same way, because if you have a smoke alarm going off in your house, you could be in a deep sleep and not wake up to the sound of the alarm going off. But then that's why your sense of smell kicks in as you start to smell the smoke, right? You wake up and you do it that way. So your body is giving you a couple of different levers to pull to make sure that you can respond to danger as it persists. But that's really what the whole concept of acoustics, in the way our prehistoric brain understands it, is a way to understand how we protect ourselves from danger, and using this as our own alarm system to make sure that we don't get caught with our, proverbial pants down, right? And kind of are being eaten for dinner by somebody that we don't really want that to happen.
Yeah, and we know that because that's such an anthropological response, and we see it actually in areas where those that are hearing impaired, when they do get a high level, let's say they had very, very low ability to hear, and then they have a more stable opportunity. The emotional impact of being able to adapt into an environment of knowing all the noises around versus the limited or low opportunity, there's actually a psychological process that community has to go through, and a lot of them, sometimes it becomes too difficult, so they choose kind of the other option, because noise is such a critical component of your psychological well-being. And that transition is just too hard in that light speed model of just turning something on.
It is. And so think about that in terms of something as simple as like sleep, right? So in your house, you generally know the noises, right? And it's why if all of a sudden your pipe starts leaking, right, in the middle of the night, that sometimes that's all you can actually hear, because your brain is attuned to not having that sound there. So when it's recognizing that happening, it's kind of pulling it in on that front. But sleep can also, let's think about if you're traveling and you're in a hotel. Now acoustics can really come into play, right? Because hotels, really, what is the job of a hotel? It's to give you a restful night's sleep, right? That's ultimately what they're trying to do. So hotels that have bad acoustics or bad soundproofing generally are failing at that task, because that's the sole premise, is why I'm trying to get a night's sleep there. But it's why a lot of people have a hard time sleeping in a hotel for two reasons. One, it's new, but two, the sounds are new, right? You're in New York
Mhm.
City at a hotel. What are even with the best soundproofing, what are you probably going to be hearing all night?
Oh, the
Honking,
city and all the noise, and
traffic,
yeah.
the garbage trucks at 2 a.m. going down the street and picking up the things, right? So that's a huge deal. And these are things that can impact sleep. And that's a big deal too, because we're not the only ones. A lot of researchers have looked at sleep and noise, and they've found some pretty interesting stuff on that side, haven't they? Um, some of the main ones they've found: noises that go typically above 40 dB are the ones that can start to really impact sleep. And in fact, as it gets higher and higher, it can go as much as a 20 to 30% increase in sleep-related issues like insomnia or hypertension as that noise level keeps rising and rising. Also, if you
Yeah.
have a noisy neighbor, somebody playing music all night, right? These are huge annoyances that you have that are all related to sound and acoustics, right?
I'll take it even further than that. There are studies that show that long-term, that chronic noise exposure really not only can it increase anxiety and depression, it creates the self like helplessness because again, this is not something that's in your control. So much so that the rest of your health starts to fail when you feel that sense because we know that depression can lead to other it's a
Yeah.
pre-existing component to other health issues um, and add to the fact that you are not getting sleep so now you kind of are getting a double whammy in many instances when you have that chronic noise exposure across it because your lack of sleep hinders your health and the actual noise hinders your health that is exposing you to it which is leading to all these other repercussions and I think that there's something really interesting about it and there and to your point there are some that are above 40 dB which and the louder they get the more easily toxic they become because it's really easy to kind of put in it's that toxic acoustic environment for sleep and humans to really function and have a good quality of life. The other end of the spectrum, though, is there are some people that do like noise. And I know you're one of those people who likes to sleep with some noise playing in the background.
So ever since I was like 4 years old, maybe sooner, my parents bought me a fan because I was hot at night. And I literally to this day can't sleep without the fan. It's like a mini white noise thing. And we'll talk about white noise and sound masking in a little bit. But for me, I have to have it. Sleep is very. I'm sure we'll do a session on sleep at a different point in time because there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff with sleep that's in there. But for me, I cannot sleep in silence. I actually need noise, but I need the right kind of noise. And we were talking earlier, and when I'm in a hotel, if you're in one of those ones where the air conditioning kind, the ones where you kind of can it flicks on or off in the middle of the night, a lot of people are like me that find that really annoying. You and I are opposites. So I always turn it on and need to try to find a way to make sure it stays on throughout the entire night. If it turns off, I instantaneously wake up because it's just way too quiet for me. And apparently you're the opposite, right? You need it to be off.
Dead
If it
quiet.
turns on, that noise disrupts your sleep and then you can't get back to bed.
Yeah, I cannot. I don't. So I'll give you how extreme minded. I don't even keep a clock, like an analog clock in my bedroom because I don't like hearing the noise. And now for context, I spent a lot of summers and a lot of time at my grandmother's farm where it's dead quiet. And that
Yeah.
is like some of my fondest memories in addition to it. So there's probably a little bit of nostalgia baked into that. Um, but even when we lived in the city, we lived in a very quiet neighborhood. In Kosovo, our population was almost 200,000, but we lived in like a very quiet neighborhood. I never had to hear about the hustle and bustle of a city. So that was my experience. So when we moved into Chicago, even growing up, I slept in the living room for a long period of time because my bedroom would face
Straight
the street, and it was so much
too noisy.
noise when we lived in Chicago. And every time I travel, I hate when it turns on. I used to I told you the story about when I was in college and I had an apartment and my central air went out and for a temporarily period of time I had to have one of those window ACs baked in
Yeah.
that makes so much noise and I had that for I don't know 4 or 6 weeks or so. I could not sleep. I went to a friend's house to sleep because it was so loud and it was so I'm on the exact opposite end that even little noise bothers me, which is why where I live is a very, very quiet street and I don't hear cars zipping through or what have you, because it bothers me to that level. And even though I'm a deep sleeper, the little noises are the noises that wake me up, not the big ones.
It just gets you. Isn't it funny how we're all wired differently, but it's all around the same issue as acoustics. As you were telling me that story, that reminded me of when my first little apartment out of college was in San Francisco, and you don't let me just say it this way. At the time, it was very competitive to find a place to live, right? Usually, if there's a showing, you had to show up. There's like 30 people already waiting. You kind of have to figure out how to get first in line, get first dibs to get into one of these places. Well, we got super lucky with our apartments. It was in a great neighborhood, and we were, my wife now, girlfriend at the time, were running late to go to the appointment. And we showed up like 30 minutes late, and there was nobody there. It's like, and it turns out that the realtor was running late, and everybody who showed up waited the 30 minutes or so and just started leaving because they thought that nobody came. We waited another 15 minutes, and the realtor actually came, and so it was just us. So we took 2 looks around the apartment. Yep, the good neighborhood, things work perfect, and we took it. We didn't know these things you don't think about, right? It was right next to a bus line on there. It was an electric bus line, though. So like so you like the first night sleeping there, I remember this. I looked out the window. What was that noise? And it was this electric line. So you heard the bus kind of stop. You heard that right when the doors open and then go on their way. Eventually, like anything, we kind of got used to it and went on. It could have been way worse. Let me be very clear about that. But it was still with it was built in like the 1900s. So it had no acoustics, no soundproofing, none of that kind of stuff built into the apartment. You heard all these things. And over time, it really does impact you, you know?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the noise. Like I've lived in areas where I've lived across the street, actually same apartment. I've lived across the street from the train. The train didn't bother me because it would be just soft enough that it wouldn't be bothersome. But there is something about the types of noise, obviously, that impact it. And it took me a while to adapt to the train, but it eventually became part of it. The air conditioner, not so much. That was
No.
too annoying for me.
I guess probably for this, question, can you sleep on airplanes?
I can.
You can. Okay, so that's interesting. So I sleep like a baby on airplanes because it's like a white noise. Again, it's like that fan noise, right? So that drum of the engine that's going, that just kind of lulls me to sleep. A lot of other people have a hard time sleeping on airplanes because that's the noise that can really disrupt them, and they can't sleep in that kind of environment, at least without the most primitive form of acoustics, which is earplugs, right?
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
hint that you can have to help to block out this sound and start to make it better.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. But this is why there is an entire discipline of researchers out there who study, right, both the impact of noise, neuroscientifically, what's happening in the brain. How are you physiologically responding when that noise happens? And then what my company is really good at, which is how do you mitigate that, right? So you have a place with bad acoustics. Okay, what do you do? So we talked about that restaurant with hard walls, hard ceilings, everything hard. How do you is that fixable? Can we make that into an environment that is actually okay for us to be in? The good news is, yes, you can. It might cost a little money, but you can find a way to work the acoustics. And it's important for your home. It's important for businesses, and it's vitally important for your office space, right? And that's one of the biggest areas where bad sound or bad acoustics can lead to loss of productivity, unhappiness, and can even be enough to get people to leave companies if they can't focus or actually be able to have a productive workday in the office, especially these days when the whole RTO push is back in session. And now we're so used to working at home, we're kind of being pushed to go back into the office space.
Yeah, and I know that we have statistics around, unwanted office noises, which is the biggest issue, right? If you are mandating a return of the office and now your team members are going from being at home in a relatively quiet environment, more or less self-controlled to their desired level of noise, to a one size fits all ecosystem, and most offices are open office spaces. Um, Maybe they have some cubicles which may absorb some noise, but not all, especially if you're kind of in a high traffic area. Um, to that, it's that equivalent of what I talked about being from hearing impaired to hearing enabled, because you're having a very similar experience of going from very quiet or very self-controlled to that level of chronic noise exposure. And I think part of that is, without realizing, those kind of noises, even like a few noises throughout the day, if you have a consistent flow of that kind of noise, it can reduce your employee productivity by 66%. That's a
Terrible.
huge chunk. And we know that certain stats say that productivity levels tend to be actually higher when you're working from home.
Because you can do the work.
Right, because you have time to do the work. You don't have anyone popping into your desk or cubicle every few minutes.
Unless your kids are at home, and in that case, it's a whole different ballgame in that case.
Right. But I think then, even in that case, if you've got, I think the key there is the work from home appeal is that flexibility to say, I'm going to take all my meetings now, and then maybe I have to, my kids come home from daycare or preschool or whatever. I can, get them food or get them lunch or something. And then I go through like 3 hours of just powering through because I know that they're going to take naps. The beauty of remote work is not that they have 8 consistent hours of work without being bothered. The beauty of it is they have the flexibility to adapt their day
Correct.
throughout it and control the noise levels.
Yep.
Right? Whereas in the office, you really have, you're a lot less susceptible to saying, no, I can't take that meeting, even though I'm just sitting here and getting some work done.
Absolutely. And the research that we've done, when installing things like sound masking systems, which is one of the ways that you can work to help with noise mitigation, particularly in office spaces, is we've seen, about roughly 51% reduction in distractions, right? 27% decrease in work and stress related anxiety, up to 40% increase in focus, which makes sense because you're not hearing all the other noises around you. This is the one that I love because if you think about it, it makes sense. Average of 10% boost in short-term memory recall. Okay, so you think about that for a second. Why is that a big deal? Because if you and I are talking, right, and I'm having that conversation with you, and my desk mate over here is having his lunch and eating a bag of chips, I'm trying to focus on you, but without good acoustics, what am I hearing? Crunch, crunch,
Yeah.
crunch, crunch. Oh wait, what'd you just say, Ellza? Oh, that you lose your train of thought. Has that happened to you? Right?
Yeah. I mean, that happens virtually, even, let alone in person, right? Because you're like, hey, you broke up. Can you repeat? Wait, hold on. Let me figure out what I just said. Now think about that times 10 when you're in an office. Because you have at least 6 to 9 people within what? I was gonna say meters, but it's 10 meter, a 6 meter squared around you kind of thing, given the fact that there's usually at least one other person 6 feet to each direction of you.
Yep. It's huge. And for sound, at its basic core, what do you need to get rid of a sound? Right? At the end of the day, you need something to absorb the sound. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is the sound just literally keeps bouncing off of every surface until it finds something to soak it in. And so walls, you need paintings, but you can put sound absorption panels. That would do the trick. Back in the day, even 20 years ago, when they had cubicles, they weren't as loud because the cubicles were high walled in fabric. Guess what? That it's not perfect, but even something as simple as a high walled can start to reduce the sound. In today's open floor office design, the perimeters, not the oh my gosh, dividers. See, there you go. The dividers are short, so you can speak clearly to the person right across from you. So yet again, there's absolutely nothing, unless the company or whoever is designing the office thought about it, to absorb the sound and start to get it away. And so all these sounds, the chips, the 2 people over there in their Zoom call. I don't know about you. I talk. Okay, I've been told I talk at a slightly higher octave on my Zoom calls than I do normally. I don't know why it's a response, but I think people just generally talk louder. So you have three people kind of shouting at their computers in the Zoom. You have somebody eating lunch. You have people walking behind you. If you're out by a busy street, you've got sirens or other things that can go by. How are you supposed to focus in that kind of environment, right? What are you
I
going to
mean,
do?
you can't. That's the whole purpose, and it goes. This is why acoustics is so transcends so many of these topics. You know, not just health and performance, but overall just impact around your day in and day out. We know that, and I think you had pulled some research around job satisfaction being about a quarter lower in
Yep.
areas that don't have great
Bad
acoustic
acoustics.
spaces.
Yep.
And when then you think about turnover, well, what is the cost of turnover if you know that 25% of that, at least the overall people, moving and leaving the organization, a portion of that is because of the noise traveling. And I have been in those spaces because again, the vast majority, the more popular model is open office environments.
Yep.
And there is still a claim to do that. And I know you and I are going to talk a little bit further around like how do we combat open collaboration with privacy and focus and productivity
Right.
and
We can
balancing
do it.
that.
We can absolutely do it, which is the good
Yeah.
news. There are solutions to this problem, but not a lot of people are thinking about it through the lens of noise. That's
Yeah.
the issue,
And I
right?
think if we picture this in kind of almost the equivalent of Maslow's hierarchy of needs when it comes to acoustics, it's obviously that health and human ecosystem or human impact. Then we talk a little bit more about the overall performance of that person. And then we talk about their productivity and their focus. And I think when we look at those in those kind of quadrants in that, even if we know, and it doesn't even go just to workplaces, it could go into medical clinics, it can go
Yep.
into retail, it can like all of these spaces, and we know that especially medical environments have the worst acoustic environments that we're aware of because they have to be sterile and they have to be easy to clean, and that still fulfills that, but it doesn't offer the privacy and the lack of noise, because we do know that anxiety is one of the triggers of lowering patient outcomes. So there are so many use cases throughout it, but I think part of what we're trying to communicate is the something that was innocuous and subtle is no longer innocuous and subtle. In fact, because you had that 18-month to 2 year, if not longer, range of being able to control the acoustics in your environment as an employee, potentially as a patient if you're going through telehealth solutions, or even as a patron at a restaurant or other ecosystem. All of those things brought to the forefront things that were innocuous and subtle. And the level of sensitivity is that much higher.
It is. And the other big way to think about this is one of the biggest opportunities that you have as a leader, as an owner of an office space, as a leader of a restaurant or a hotel, is to think about how sound enters the equation, because not everybody is. And that's a key differentiator that can make your place a desirable place to work, or a way to retain your employees and not drive them out if you're forcing them back into a building that they're not able to focus or be able to conduct their work in a conducive way. I
Mhm.
love designers. Designers are great for aesthetics, but and they keep me in business. Trust me, it's fantastic. But not a lot of them think about the sound repercussions of the spaces that they design. And so it's really important to look at this at the front end of this process. If you're thinking of renovating, if you're thinking of updating, bringing an acoustical engineer, get a study, let people try to help you understand how you can use sound to your advantage, not deal with it after the fact. Because guess what? One of the very first budgets is cut when they start doing this and new construction? Sound. I can't tell
Yeah.
you how many times that's happened. They bring us in, we do a whole design, we tell them exactly what we need. They cut it out of the budget. 3 to 6 months after the building opens, they call us back and say, hey, we need you to come out and do something. Guess what? It's 2 or 3 times more expensive now, because now we have to retrofit. We have to go in during after hours. You have to do so much more work to get back to the front if you just realized how important it was at the front end and understand that is not the place to cut when you're trying to trim those budgets on the front end.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it from my experience in construction is designers, as you mentioned, have a really unique spot in making sure things are aesthetically pleasing. And a lot of our experiential design includes like how do we create spaces that include sound, which is why our partnership works out really, really well in it, and embedding you into our process. But if we think about a design as an aesthetic, um, it's not just visual though. Most the design is the immersive experience, which is why we have our experiential design framework, is to make sure that we include sound and play and all of these aspects, because I talked about earlier in the call, in our discussion, the tolerable level of uncomfortability has lowered. Things that used to be tolerable are no longer there. And that's really where the world is going. There's just an added level of sensitivity
People are
to,
just more irritable lately. Things that
yeah,
didn't annoy you are just annoying you more. You don't know what it is, but just think about every aspect of your life. A little bit of a line, a flight delay. Just think of how people react in these situations that didn't used to inflame them before, and now you're just seconds away from getting set off by something.
yeah.
It's crazy.
It's significantly more sensitive, and it's just we have a higher we have just a higher rate of expectations at this
We do.
point. And it's happening in every industry. It's happening in everything from consumer to employee to partner to what have you, patron. Um, all of those aspects are being impacted. And I think acoustic is a really good way for any organization that is looking to say, okay, I want to make changes, and I either want to make this drastic change or I want to take it little by little. Acoustics should be one of your top options to really consider, because it makes it subtle enough that you're not making these big impacts, but big enough that when you walk into the space, you automatically see the behavior change.
You know it. Your employees will recognize it. The number one question you get is, how do you know a sound masking system works? I tell people, turn it off. After you've had it for a week, just push the off button and see what happens. Everybody freaks out. I'm literally not kidding you. It is the first day or two, it takes a little bit to get used to that sound. It's a little bit of a low hum. If you turned it off the next day, instantaneously everybody would notice everything, because there are so many more noises and things that you don't realize that are being covered up by this and go there. Whenever my system's actually been on the fritz here in my office, I've got a repairman coming out to help me get this troubleshooted. And it's the same thing. When it goes off, I notice it instantly, and I really can't focus without it. My office is just too quiet, and I hear everything. There's not great soundproofing. I hear the guys next door. I hear the footsteps out in the hallway. And if you're trying to focus on work, I need to be in that zone. And that's the stuff that can just take you out of it. So
Yeah, this was
it's good.
great. I'm
It is.
really
I think it's a
glad.
good this was just meant to be our top level introduction, right? Our next one, we're going to look at giving you a little bit more of the keys to the castle, right? We've hinted a couple of the ways that you can do it, but our next session, we're going to deep dive a little bit more into actually what are specific action items that you can do to help improve the acoustics in your office, your businesses, or even these are principles you can apply to your homes as well, or apartments, right? That's the beauty
Yeah.
of what this is.
So, as you mentioned, we're going to cover a little bit more about how do we enhance workplaces using acoustics, and driving it across different areas of a working environment, whether that be a lobby or a desk space or even a conference room. So we're looking forward to chatting that, and this will be in great conjunction with our future of work sessions as well. And yeah, we're looking forward to chatting with everyone later. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ellza. Take care.
Take care.